Hi, my name is Kristen Zecki, and I'm a Senior Associate Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at Fletcher. I'm sure you've been welcomed many times, but I will say welcome once again because we really do appreciate you taking the time to be here. We know it's a big decision you have ahead of you, or perhaps you've already made it, but we hopefully being here will give you the chance to really get to know us better. So what our hope is today from this panel is that you just get a real sense of what student life and life is like here at Fletcher. We hope you ask candid questions, the questions that are really top of mind, and we have some great resources on the Fletcher experience, and that's what we're here to talk about. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is ask all of our student panelists to give a brief introduction so you know who you're talking to, and then we'll go from there and answer any questions that you have. So we'll start with Priya.
Hey, Hi, my name is Priya Knutson. I'm originally from Syracuse, New York. I did my undergrad degree at the American University in Cairo, where I studied political science. And after I graduated, I moved to New York City, and I was working for a year as a AmeriCorps member, focusing on community health. And after that, I followed it up with 2 years in the Peace Corps, serving in Nepal on a food security project. And now at Fletcher, I'm a 2018 MALD, so I'll graduate next year. And I'm specializing in international communication and human security, and also pursuing a certificate in international development. And as I was applying to Fletcher, I also applied to the Thomas Pickering Foreign Affairs Fellowship, and I was selected for that program through the State Department. So I'll be joining the Foreign Service as a public affairs Foreign Service officer after I graduate.
My name is Cian McCarthy. I'm from Ireland. I did my undergraduate there in Trinity College Dublin in philosophy and economics. After college, I spent 2 years in Japan as an English teacher in the rural Japan. And then I came to Fletcher, and here I study international organizations and international political economy. And I'm a second year, so from June I'm going to be going back to Dublin, and I'm going to be working as a foreign policy researcher in an Irish think tank. So that's my job.
Good morning. My name is Aisha. I am in the LLM program here at Fletcher. The LLM is a Masters in International Law program. Originally, I'm from New Delhi, India, and I graduated from the National Law program in Calcutta. I studied law and public policy with a focus on international development. Right after graduating from law school, I worked in a corporate law firm for a couple of years, and then I worked with the Indian government doing a policy and administrative role. I also I did some work in social entrepreneurship. At Fletcher, my focus is economic laws and development. I am also co-chair of the Fletcher UN Club and the Fletcher International Law Society. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the courses here and about extracurricular activities here and career aspirations.
Good morning, everybody. I sound a bit strange today. I was sick over the weekend and still recovering. I also don't sound as charming as Cian, despite despite sharing the European heritage. I'm from Germany originally. I did my bachelor's in Germany, worked in German foreign policy for a bit, and then came to Fletcher 2 years ago, so I'll be graduating in May. My focus here is on international security studies and political systems and theories. I'm leading the Fletcher European Affairs Society and Fletcher Students in Security, 2 student organizations here. And I was also involved in the European Conference this year, which we co-host with a bunch of Harvard graduate schools.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Harrigan. I'm originally from Kentucky, went to undergrad in Cleveland, Ohio, ended up doing an internship at the Food and Ag Organization in Rome for 7 months, then did 3.5 years in DC. Now I'm here as a first-year student. I focus mostly on environment resource policy and development economics for food security and agriculture. And I'm involved in a lot of the environmental and food clubs on campus, and I work over at the Tufts Institute of the Environment. So happy to give a bit more detail on that if those organizations are interesting for anyone here.
Thank you. Great. So now it's your turn. What kinds of questions do you have? What can we help with? And again, I can kick it off if nobody has a question. But
I have kind of a generic question, and like everyone could tell their answer it, or whoever wants to. But I'm curious what a general kind of day and/or week would look like. You know how I know you probably all have different schedules, but how often are you in class? Once a week, twice a week? Are you meeting with clubs right after that? How often? How much time per week are you spending on homework and reading? And just kind of a general breakdown would be really helpful.
That's a great question. So, week in a life of a Fletcher student.
So if you're interested in security studies, at least during one semester, twice a week, you'll have to get up fairly early because the Rule of Force, which is the foundational course for the security studies field, starts at 7:45 in the morning. I guess beyond that, my typical day usually includes 2 classes, sitting in the library for an extended period of time, probably around between 3 and 4 hours, reading, writing, all those kinds of things. Club activities are usually not organized in regular meetings, so that depends a bit on the student organization that you're involved in. But usually there is a sort of leadership circle of, I don't know, 2 to 5 people that organize events or get people out of the Fletcher bubble to go somewhere downtown Boston or grab a drink at the bar in the area. So there is a good balance, I think, of social life, student life.
I think one thing about Fletcher that's nice is that because like students here, in a lot of graduate schools, students take have a job and then kind of have an evening approach. But in Fletcher, everybody here is pretty much a full-time student. But that means you can also have a 9 to 5 student life. I think you can get everything done if you're like your classes. Some classes are from 5:30 to 7:30, but you might have one of them a year. Most classes are finished by 5:30, and if you get up to the library early, you can do the reading for them in advance. So I would rarely find myself having to work past dinner, or you have to work on the weekend only if it's midterms or you have a big paper. So it's quite good. You just still do have free time if you're disciplined about it. But it also depends how much you're involved in. Some people do so much extracurricular stuff, but that's optional, so you're never going to be forced to do it. But I'm usually a 9 to 5:30 kind of day. And last semester I didn't have to work in the weekend much at all. This semester I do a little bit because my classes are at the start of the week, but I have Thursday and Friday off, so it's nice.
Can I just say maybe that you're atypically disciplined?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Possible.
I don't know.
I was going to say, because I actually am someone that probably works all day during the week, till very late in the night. But it's because I really struggle to get work done when I'm on campus. I find Fletcher to be just so social, and there's so many lunch events or evening events that when I'm here, I can't get work done in the library, and that's just personal. So I have to wait until I go home and focus there. But again, that's my decision that I'm making. In terms of schedule, I was really strategic this semester and made sure I didn't have class on Monday or Friday. So those are free, and I usually use it to either work on campus or do anything else. And then even then, 3 of my classes meet only once a week. So it's not as if there's so much of a time suck, so to speak, even though that's why you're obviously here on campus. Reading definitely can take a lot of time. A lot of students in classes end up figuring out ways to break it up with other, group reading, study groups, essentially. And then also you do a lot of group work in class, and that is something that is a fun thing to start trying to figure out how to coordinate between everyone's diverse schedules. It's doable, it's fun, but sometimes you do end up working a bit outside of a 9 to 5. Not by choice.
But that's a model.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's possible.
Strive for that.
Anyone else want to chime in? Other questions?
I have one. I'm curious if there is a concentration that students gravitate towards, or a group of concentrations, and then going after that, if there's a employment sector that students also gravitate towards.
So we'll focus on the first one first, perhaps is kind of most popular concentrations. I mean, I can tell you by the numbers. I'll start with that. Yeah, and then maybe you can kind of talk about experiences. I mean, security studies, kind of the development fields, broadly speaking, whether that's development economics or human security, international business, and environment to an extent. But because Fletcher is so interdisciplinary, I think that those manifest in very different ways and choices amongst the fields themselves. So, and law, I'm sorry, I forgot law. And law, obviously, being one of the most popular. But perhaps you can talk about your experiences.
I mean, it's entirely, I mean, yes, I mean, international law is my focus area, but that's the beauty of Fletcher. And that's why I chose this program, because I'm not just studying the law. I'm able to study economics, I'm able to study business, I'm able to study development and sort of like, the sort of political sciencey subjects as well, and sort of relate them to the law, which is what you need if you want, a career, which is what people who hire look for. And now that, I'm sort of going through the whole recruitment process, it is about the interdisciplinary skills that you're bringing, which Fletcher gives you. So, I think in that sense, I think it's really great, the streams that you have here and what you can sort of pick and select what suits your research interest and your career interests and really modify it to your advantage. And another really great thing which I wanted to mention before is that you have this diverse international experience. So you are studying with someone who's from the Japanese government. Your classmate is someone from Ireland, someone from Australia, or someone from the Middle East. And they bring in this really interesting perspective, both, even when you're talking to them or even when you're in class with them, which is just, you would not get it if you were in a regular sort of domestic focus program. And I think that's what really adds to your learning, and that's what employers look for. I mean, do you understand how the world works? So.
I think another thing is that everybody has two kind of fields of study, and I actually accidentally had a third, I just noticed, but I just happened to have taken the classes for it. But you'd rarely even find two people who have the same two. You'd have people who do security and development, security and business, security, or law, and it's amazing. That's the thing. So you don't really find people converging, except sometimes you'll have a lot of the kind of business people will be in a lot of the same classes because they have a lot of, especially the MIBs have a lot of core classes they just have to take. But apart from that, you tend to see different people in all the different classes. So there's not, it doesn't end up being grouped into security people, business people, law people, because everybody takes classes from every department.
So another really good thing is that you can change your specializations if you want to. I know from my first to second semester, I did that, and I might still do that for next semester. Hopefully not. But I think in the first year, you can take a lot of these breadth requirement courses, and in doing that, it can help shape what you want to study. And that's a really great thing about Fletcher, is that you're not locked into a certain field of study throughout the 2 years, and there's really that flexibility, and there's overlap between some of the fields of study, so you don't have to feel pressured to be in a certain course throughout your entire time here.
And then actually this sort of goes more into the career and what people do afterwards. I would say in general, and this is a very generic answer in one sense, but Fletcher people are within all sorts of industries, and you can find folks there. Some a bit less than others. For example, right now I'm really interested in the idea of exploring corporate responsibility, sustainability within private sector. And I would say we have less of an alumni network that's there, but actually starting to work with the Career Services Office and going through their database, I started finding folks that were there, and they ended up hooking me into their network, and there actually were way more Fletcher folk than I had actually anticipated. So, I do think there are certain sectors that have much more of a Fletcher network, but we are everywhere. The mafia exists. Yeah.
And also what's nice is that we're kind of all going for different jobs, so it's not necessarily directly competitive. Some schools you have, I think where everybody's going for the same couple of jobs in either the UN or the Foreign Service, and people can kind of get competitive about it. But here you have everybody sharing job opportunities, internship opportunities all the time. And I think everybody kind of realizes at Fletcher that we're by creating kind of a joint community network that's going to help each other go forward in the future, not, who can get the best job out of Fletcher. So that's nice.
So again, by the numbers, I'll also mention that statistically it is true that people do quite literally everything. If you look at the breakdown of sectors across the past couple of years, it's usually about a third going into the private sector, a third going into nonprofits, and a third going into public sector and international organizations. And again, if you were to break down each one of those, you would see that there's a pretty wide variety in each one of those as well, in terms of private sector industries, in terms of missions of NGOs that people are working with, and kind of UN and other international organizations that people are seeking. So it's the hardest question to answer frequently, what people do from Fletcher. Great, thank you. You had a...
Yeah, I have a non-academic question, in kind of two parts. So what do you think this area and Davis Square was able to offer you, or is able to offer you, that maybe wasn't as available in other schools you were considering? And then also me thinking about, I'm coming from an income to no income. When you're thinking about, student deals in the area or affordable housing, how did you tackle that, and what has your experience been?
Talking about life at Fletcher in terms of the immediate area and the reality of rice and beans for all your meals.
If you compare, I think, the housing market in Medford, Somerville, to some of the housing markets at peer schools, it's all kind of expensive. But Medford, Somerville isn't more expensive than, DuPont Circle or New York City or so. And so far, yes, I mean, compared to, I don't know, somewhere in rural Kentucky, you can probably find cheaper housing than in the greater Boston area. But again, compared to the other peer schools, it's not more or significantly less expensive. That goes for the availability of services for social life, or shopping and all those things as well. Yeah, it's not drastically different from DC or New York, I would say. What makes Boston different, I think, are, for once, the 50 universities that are in the city. Those make Boston a very young and vibrant place. There's a lot of exchange between schools, among students, with professors, and staff, and folks that just work in the sort of university fields. Fletcher has a very close relationship with Harvard University. I think it was, when it was founded in 1933, it was started as a collaboration between Tufts and Harvard universities, and then came to Tufts a couple of years later entirely. But that relationship is still very close. You can cross-register and do classes at Harvard. I had mentioned that European conference that I was involved in, we organized that with Harvard graduate schools as well. And so there's a lot of exchange right there, I think.
So actually last year when I was here this past weekend, or this weekend as well, the question I asked every single person was what the advantage of moving from DC was, where I had my network, I was comfortable, I had my housing. And I am so glad that I left DC. It's 2 years, I'll probably end up there. But things that I ended up figuring out, and this was just my personal vibe in going to Georgetown and SAIS campus, was the idea of students there either already had been in DC, and so they had their outside networks outside of campus, so still spent a lot of time away from, their buildings. Not to say that their networks weren't strong, but I just think people were much more diverse in where they were spending time. Here, we really spend a lot of time on campus within the Fletcher building, exchanging ideas. And grad school is expensive, and one of the reasons you're paying for it is for your network. So I do think there's some just tremendous value in terms of staying here, working with these amazing people. As Raphael says, Boston area is amazing in terms of the Fletcher events that are put on, the Tufts campus events that are put on, Harvard, MIT. There's so much going on that you're not at a loss in terms of what a DC or a New York City could offer. Boston has all of that too.
And just speaking as an international student, first of all, there's housing at Blakely, which is highly subsidized. I live on campus, so that's excellent. In terms of food and groceries and just finding the right, I actively scout for that also. As an international student, you have to, look for stuff that is cheap. So, I find this particular area, Davis Square, Medford, to be substantially cheaper than, and I've not lived anywhere else in the US, but I find it quite affordable as an international student. So I think that's something to say about it.
And Davis is a pretty cool area now. It's getting it's like even in the 2 years I've been here, it's improved a lot. There's been like loads of new restaurants. There's a new like kind of Whole Foods type store, Be Fresh just open. Like it's definitely getting better and better. And it's like you can go to Davis on a Thursday or Friday night, and there's always going to be Fletcher people in like in the bars, the restaurants. So it's kind of a good vibe there. And most people generally live within, I don't know, like a 15-minute walk of campus. So it's easy. There's a lot going on, and people are generally doing stuff in the evening. So if that's where the social part is pretty good.
So I live off campus near Porter Square, which is kind of nice because to have like a little bit of a separate life over there in Porter, and then also come to school. And I work in Davis in a cafe. And what Cian said is true. Like every time I'm working, there's a bunch of Fletcher people who come in, and it's a really small community, and it's nice that you see familiar faces around town. And I was comparing to living in New York City. I think Boston is a better place to study because for me, I feel like I can concentrate more here, and especially living in Somerville, I don't feel like I'm missing out on like the nightlife in New York or something compared to here. And I feel like it's really good to concentrate and to invest in these 2 years as like a academic experience, because you might not have the chance to do that again. So I think you won't be missing out on too much at all if you come here.
So I'm the by the numbers gal. So I will say, despite Raphael said, I think the cost of living actually is, I mean, if you just look at like federal guidelines and reimbursement things, it's a decent amount cheaper here than it would be in maybe San Francisco, New York, and DC in terms of other U.S. Cities. Not cheaper than Kentucky. Sorry, Molly, to keep picking on Kentucky. Or Kansas. We'll pick another K-state in the middle of the country. So, I do think that does help to an extent, and Blakely is certainly an option as well. If you're interested in learning more about just housing specifically, there's going to be a housing session later on today. We'll talk about the process of finding housing and looking at Blakely. There's also a financing your education session later on as well. But maybe each one of you could just talk briefly about where you live and how you found it. I think that can be a helpful thing.
Go, Cian.
So I live pretty nearby. Last year I lived in Boston, like right downtown, and that was pretty cool, like in a way, because I got to it's basically a different city, really. Like technically it is a different city, but it also feels like different because I was downtown and then I was coming up here, and the only problem was the commute was a little bit long, even though I was on the Red Line, but it just wasn't. I was definitely missing out on social stuff here. So then this year I moved up. I'm living about 7 minutes away, just really near campus, walking. And I found it there was like a Facebook group. I don't know, it probably hasn't been set up for the incoming students this year, but there'll be a Facebook group set up, and people are looking for roommates. And mine has been a Fletcher apartment for generations. So it's just, I knew the people who lived there last year, and they said if you can find 4 people, get together. And a lot of the landlords around here know Fletcher and seem to like Fletcher students, so are willing to give you they were going to raise our rent, but when they found out we were Fletcher, they decided to keep it at the standard level.
So as I said, I live near Porter Square, so that's around it's like a 30-minute walk, but I can walk for 15 minutes and then take the shuttle here, and it's a free shuttle from Tufts, so have no transportation costs at all. And I live with my friends from Peace Corps, so one of them found it on just searching through different broker websites. I don't know if I would recommend that necessarily because you had to pay a broker fee, which was not nice. It's like the equivalent of 1 month's rent. So if you could find it through maybe like a second year who's leaving, I think that would be ideal. My rent is a bit lower because it's, it's further away from campus, but the broker fee is not the best.
I already said I live on campus. I live in Blakely, and you have to apply for it. You'll get an email about it, and it's great. It's like 80 students, and it's completely fully furnished. You get all utilities. Everything is paid for. You don't have to pay for anything separately, and it's a great community to be a part of, and it's very international, very diverse, and you never feel lonely, and it's amazing. I would really highly recommend it. If you can get in, take it. So.
I live about a 15-minute walk from here, right down there. With 3 other Fletcher students. We found each other also through the Facebook group.
I also live about 15 minutes away from campus walking. I live with 2 non-Fletcher students, but they're tough students in PhD and master's programs in the other schools. I actually really enjoy it. Not that I wouldn't have liked to stay with Fletcher people, but I find it sort of refreshing to get exposure to things outside of Fletcher programs since I'm here all the time. And I did find it also through the Fletcher Facebook page, the incoming student page. So between that and then once, if you do end up coming here, get subscribed to the Fletcher social listserv. There's so many things that are flashed there in terms of housing that I don't want to say it's easy, but it shouldn't be challenging necessarily to find options, would be my perception.
I actually have questions for all the 3 international students because I am an international student. So I have 2 questions in regards of that. First is how big is the name of Fletcher when you go back to your own country, especially like when you seek employment? Like how is it like to connect with all the Fletcher alumni? Another thing is for all the students here, like what chance like you can actually go abroad and maybe like do an internship like in Geneva or something like I've heard last night.
That depends a bit on what field you're looking into. So in the field of international affairs broadly, particularly in diplomatic services across the world, Fletcher's really a strong name. Just because there have been so many generations of foreign service officers from all over the place going through the school and sort of returning to their home countries and then serving there. That might be different in entirely different sectors that don't necessarily have anything to do really with what Fletcher is doing. But if you're interested in those, you probably won't come to Fletcher anyway. With respect to internships, a ton of people go abroad for their summer internships. So I guess DC and New York are the sort of most prominent domestic US internship locations, and a lot of people go there, but many people also go abroad. Geneva is one place. Belgium for all EU and sort of NATO institutions that they host. People go to East Asia. People also take a semester off or so and do a Boren fellowship to do language studies abroad. I know a couple of people who have been in Russia to do that, or Thailand, I think, Indonesia. So there are plenty of opportunities to actually come here as an international student and then go abroad for the summer or even a longer period of time, also on a student exchange or dual or joint degree or so.
Yeah, similarly, in India, it's huge. Fletcher is a great name. We have a huge community of Fletcher students. In fact, one of our political leaders is from Fletcher, and we met him. He was a senior diplomat in the UN. So primarily because of its connections to the UN and international development agencies, which Indians love, Fletcher is extremely well known, very strong. I wanted to come to Fletcher since I was in the 10th grade. So that's how well known Fletcher is. And in terms of internships and job opportunities, Fletcher will open so many doors for you that a lot of other schools will not. I mean, I was able to get an internship at the UNFCCC because of Fletcher. I was able to get other UN internships also because of this. I know a Japanese girl who's going to go to the Caribbean to intern with the UNHCR. I know an Indian girl who's going to Sierra Leone to work in impact evaluation. I know a girl from Kenya who's going to be going to Indonesia to work in microfinance. So you do not get more diverse and more international than Fletcher.
Yeah, in Ireland, I wouldn't say Fletcher has a big name among kind of like just average people. Like my mother always jokes that I go to the Fletcher School near Harvard, because like people hadn't really heard of it. But then, so I was kind of a little bit. That was one worry I had, and then I went back last summer did an internship in Dublin, in the place that I'm going to be working, and so it's like very foreign policy, and then quite a lot of people had heard, like a lot of the people within that community had heard of it, and yeah, those who have heard of it definitely have a very high esteem or high opinion of it. And then yeah, in terms of internships, people go everywhere, like Middle East, Europe, everywhere. So there's definitely
To add, maybe different to other schools which might have a sort of more intrinsically higher brand recognition, like the place down the street. I think Fletcher opened doors for you because of its network and the alumni that are working in interesting institutions. So even if the boss of that certain institution might not know the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, then probably somebody who works for her, who has gone through the school, will be able to help you, and in a much more meaningful way than somebody from a different school might be able to or willing to.
And with regards to your question about international experience, I think you addressed really well, Aisha, the kinds of international internships people have. I think you probably know Fletcher has quite a few formal exchanges, but I'd also say it's just a really international-oriented student body, and if your concern is how or if you would get abroad, it's probably the last thing you should be concerned about at Fletcher. I think, from student weddings to general international travel to self-organized treks, whether to Cuba or to Israel or Pakistan or wherever it might be, students really make it a priority to get around the world. And I think that's just something that's a fabric, not a formalized thing, but very much a fabric of the culture at Fletcher. So I don't know if any of you have had any kind of more personal experiences like that, maybe more for the second years, but
Been on any treks or
Yeah,
anything?
I just got back from the Israel trek, so it was a mostly funded trek that 40 people go on. You only have to pay for flights; everything there is covered. And 40 people a year go, and you get a full tour of Israel and Palestine, and it was a really amazing week. Some people went to Colombia this spring break. A group went to Cuba last year, and that was funded. So yeah, it's good to get around.
Yeah, they also have this thing called the Asia Leadership Trek, which is basically jointly it takes students from Harvard and MIT and Fletcher, and you go to a bunch of countries all over Asia, and it's again a great learning experience.
And since we're just sort of naming different opportunities, two things that are typical are the people interested in Arctic generally usually get to go to Iceland for the Arctic conference, and again, that's not fully funded but heavily subsidized. And then also generally there's a group of students that get to go to the the climate change negotiations. So we had about 12 students and 5 faculty go to Morocco this past year. This next year is going to be in a slightly less exciting place. It'll be Switzerland, but Fiji's hosting. So usually they'll have a significant amount of funding go to that as well.
also mentioned, we also have several funds for students that are interested in kind of pursuing their own research abroad. We have an educational enrichment fund, and then each one of the research centers have funds. So if you have a particular interest that you want to explore through your capstone or just independently, you can apply for one of those funds to travel wherever it might be and really just explore your own research. So the sky's really the limit. And then there's also, actually, anybody here get internship funding? Okay, great. Yeah.
Go.
Same funding.
I know, but you've actually had experience.
You can talk about your
I'm applying for internship funding.
Yeah, so last year, if you take an unpaid internship, the Office of Career Services give you just a check at the start of the summer to cover costs. And what they do is basically everybody who gets an unpaid internship applies, and they take however their pot of money is, and they just divide it equally. So it's not really needs-based or anything. It's just based on if you're taking an unpaid internship. So last year was just over $2,000. So that was nice. It just helped getting flights and accommodation if you're going to be going somewhere else.
Do you know what your internship is, Molly?
Yeah, I'll be at the UN Global Compact. She'll be joining me later this summer, actually. But yeah, I'll be at the Global Compact. Unfortunately, UN doesn't pay interns, but They feel like they're valuable enough that they can do that. So I'll be applying. I'll stay in New York, so definitely would love to have a stipend. So I'll be applying for funding also to help cover some of those costs this summer.
Great. How have you seen your plans for the future maybe change or evolve since coming to Fletcher? Maybe as you've been exposed to an area you hadn't considered before?
I can start maybe. I don't know. So I came in really wanting to do food security, agricultural development. I was passionate, or I still am passionate about it, but I had one perspective that I'd probably go into like a food and agriculture organization or very development work focused. This semester I'm taking corporate social responsibility class and cross-sector partnership class, which are considered more of the business track, so to speak. And now I'm much more interested in just exploring the idea of private sector sustainable sourcing around the food supply chain. So it's not a huge flip per se, but just getting 2 classes and 2 professors that I love show me this new area. I'm very interested in exploring. I don't know in 2 years' time what that means, but at least I have already seen a change.
I also changed my career goals quite significantly. In fact, I came here because 2 former German ambassadors to the United States are Fletcher alumni. Klaus Schariot, who's teaching here as well, a class on transatlantic relations always in the spring, and Wolfgang Ischinger, who is now heading the Munich Security Conference. And I had met them working in Germany. Since coming here, I've recognized that I don't want to go into diplomacy anymore, but rather want to pursue an academic career in teaching and research. And so after Fletcher, I hope to remain in the US for a bit longer and get a PhD as well. And so that just for me was a change in perspective and sort of career aspirations, I think, that Fletcher to a certain degree facilitated and gave me the space to explore as well.
Yeah, I mean, I came in with sort of a generalist approach to making a career in law and development. And I mean, because of my classes here and because of like interactions with professors, student clubs and everything, I kind of got more interested in the financing of development projects and then the anti-corruption sort of initiatives that sort of make sure that this money is not used for, you know, fraud, or especially in developing countries, because I've seen a lot of that, especially in my work with the government. So that's something that that came up to me because of the courses that I took here. Otherwise, I would have been like, so yeah, that definitely, and also environmental law and policy. I think I was taking class at Harvard on that, so that's another reason why I got interested in that. But definitely, you learn a lot about new areas which are very interdisciplinary and new career opportunities that emerge in those areas, which you would not have if you'd just gone for a very traditional single stream program. So.
You know, in my essay or whatever it was, the statement when you're applying to Fletcher, I wrote down like one place that I had in mind that I could work in afterwards, and then in June I'm going to be working there. So it didn't really change that much. But that was a lot of that was by chance. That wasn't me being like determined and headstrong and getting what I want. I just happened to meet the woman who was in charge of it in New York, and I created a relationship with her. But yes, I wouldn't say mine necessarily changed, but Ireland is also small, and there wasn't a lot of. I knew I wanted to be doing something in Ireland, so there wasn't a lot of scope for change for me if I wanted to be going back home.
So when I came to Fletcher, I was on the fence between economics and public affairs, and considering which track to go through in the State Department. And it was really helpful for me to be able to take economics focused classes and also communications classes, which helped me really decide that maybe economics isn't the best course for me and is helping me lean towards public affairs and public diplomacy for my career. And I don't think I would have been able to figure that out if I hadn't taken this like range of classes in both of those areas.
One thing, and not that this necessarily changes your career paths per se, but had I stayed in DC, I imagine that I would not have been exposed. Like, I have no background in military, no background in migration or refugee type topics. And at Fletcher, Aisha sort of alluded to this. I now have classes with military fellows or with people that have worked hardcore on the ground with migrant populations. And though I'm not changing my career path to do anything like that, I'm now getting so much more of the big picture of how complex these topics are and how important it is for all of us to be working together in this international space. So not exactly a career change, but I do think Fletcher offers something really neat in making you interact with people that maybe you would never have elsewhere.
I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I had kind of a general question. I was wondering if one of you or a few of you could speak to, I guess, whether there was a moment or a particular characteristic of Fletcher that made you choose it over whatever other schools you were deciding from.
With the Peace Corps, you kind of get a waiver of the application fees, so I went a little bit crazy and applied to a lot of schools. And then when I came back from Peace Corps, I visited a lot of these schools, and I remember feeling so confused and just doubting if I should even go to grad school, and just being in the U.S. was so weird. And then visiting schools in D.C. and New York, and then when I came to Fletcher and I had my interview here, I was so nervous, and the woman who works in the admissions office is so cool and just so relatable, and that was, and I remember feeling like, wow, that's really different from my experiences visiting the other schools. And after my interview, the dean of the school came in and introduced himself to me, and I thought, wow, this is really different than a lot of the other schools I visited. And throughout the day, just the atmosphere here is so special, and it's very welcoming here. And I feel like the kind of people who are attracted to Fletcher are both very talented and humble at the same time, which is really great, and helps you kind of thrive in that kind of environment when you don't have to worry about competition or and it really is such a collaborative environment working with I feel like I've had a group project in almost every class I've been in. It's so collaborative, and just the overall environment and interacting with your peers, I think, is really, really special here.
Similar to you all, last year I did, Fletcher, and then went and visited some of the DC schools. And as cheesy as this is, and it's basically what Priya said as well, but just the energy and the fit felt awesome here. Not to say, obviously, the other schools have great people, they're smart, but when I was on campus, folks found out I was from Kentucky, and then they're like, oh, well, you have to meet these people, or they found I was interested in environment and food security, so I had to meet these people. All of the students were really willing to meet right away and chat. I spoke to some of the professors who immediately wrote back emails. And again, not to say that couldn't happen elsewhere, but for me, it just was so obvious here, and people really they love Fletcher and they're proud, so it made it easy. So I think you do want to go off what your gut, just how good you feel at a place too.
I usually mention three and not just one aspects that I find good about Fletcher and that ultimately brought me here as well. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to come to the open house because I was in Germany back then and couldn't afford the flight. But I talked to and Skyped with a bunch of people, current students and alumni and professors as well. And what I realized is that, one, the program and its flexibility really were just a great fit for my academic aspirations. Secondly, the location I found just appealing, being in a place with 50 other universities, a lot of young people, a lot of very different young people, a lot of international folks, and academic interests and career goals and all that. And then the community that has been mentioned extensively already.
Yeah, the admissions office was probably the reason I came. I was in Japan, so I couldn't visit schools either, and I was pretty I was concerned about financial stuff as well. So that was kind of coming into it, which school could make the deal a bit easier, and it was between Fletcher and then Georgetown, George Washington, and I remember kind of sending an email out to all of them, like explaining my situation, and the other schools didn't get back, and the next day I got a phone call from Laurie in the admissions office, and she talked to me for about half an hour, just like talking through everything, and it wasn't in a pushy way. It was just really, she really just kind of cared, and I just remembered the communication with her was one thing, and also I got in touch with a couple of professors who got back to me straight away, like Molly said, and that's been something I was really shocked in general here, is the kind of I guess the relationship students have with professors here is really good. Like I'm close to all of them that I've taken classes with, and some I haven't even had classes with. A lot of them invite students over for dinner and parties a lot, and so and they realize that they want to create relationships with students too. So the professors and the faculty in general here, or the staff in general, are just really great to have a relationship with.
Isha, do you have anything to add, or you?
Everyone's covered. The only thing is Fletcher really cares for you. In fact, we even have a club called Fletcher Cares. I mean, yeah, it's really good. And I would direct your attention to this this series of videos on YouTube called Where the Hell is Fletcher? If you want to see where students are, these fun little videos, so you can see where we are, where our mafia is.
Actually, they're running on a loop today in the admissions office, so if you go to the back where the luggage is stored, you can watch for a few minutes. So.
I'm curious if any of you are taking language classes, or if you know of any language learning opportunities or communities. Just because personally, I really like to continue learning languages, and I know there's so many unique classes here that you probably don't have time to just take a language class especially if you've already committed or completed the requirements. So I'm curious.
Like I haven't taken. I know the rule.
I can talk about the story.
Talk about those tables, if nothing else. That was
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of self-organized language tables that take place either on a weekly or every 2 weeks. Also, where students from that certain background and students who are interested in improving their language skills just meet for an hour over lunch and also and talk about French cuisine or something like that. I'm hesitant, I think, to recommend somebody to take language classes for credit, even though it's technically possible. You only have like 16 credit points available during your 2 years at Fletcher. I assume that you're in the MALT program. So you have a limited amount of time and classes that you can take, just due to regulations, and filling those up with language classes might not be the smartest way to spend your time. But you can audit language classes over at Tufts, and they have a diverse array of languages available. If you can't find languages there, you might be able to find them at one of the other universities.
I think that's sound advice. I think we find that very few students, despite having a broad interest in languages, actually dedicate their credits to that. And that's just a lot because of what's available here versus what's available in the outside world. And obviously languages are something that you can find in many places. But that said, as I was coming in this morning at 7 o'clock, I saw a student sitting outside the library, and she's one of the students I know well, and she had her Arabic textbook open. And, for her, she has spent a lot of time living in the Middle East, but had never had any formal Arabic training, and she's very interested in refugee issues. So for her, it's not only a language priority, but it really ties very closely to her career priorities, and so she's working that in. She has an internship in Palestine this summer, and so she's really going to get to build on that. So I think a lot depends on if this is kind of a dabbling and a general interest versus something that really does tie very closely to your career goals. So it's really about, as with pretty much everything in Fletcher, deciding where your priorities are and how you want to allocate your time.
And Raphael just reminded us that through the library you have access to Mango languages. So there are resources if it's more just like to make sure you don't lose the language that you've already started working on. There's plenty of opportunities to do that don't cut into class credit time.
If it's French, happens to be the language, there's a class taught in French. But Professor Jacques, he teaches it in English as well. But and last year I I took both of them. Like I just he let me sit in the French one and take the English one for credit. So that was really cool. It was good practice. And I think there's an intention to have more of these regional classes taught in the language of that region, but it's still only taking off. But I definitely know the French is one that's a good class as well.
I've also heard of professors who teach regional classes, but they're in English. They're happy to give readings in the language of that region if upon request. So if you're really interested in making those readings take even longer, you can request that.
I don't know if you guys have seen the schedule of classes we can go visit today, but do you guys recommend a certain class or think one class would be really interesting as like, this is what the Fletcher experience is like? Good overview.
I said you have the
Yeah. I'll read it out and then you guys can. So a few are already happening, but econometrics, political. Econometrics is one of the favorite classes.
But to come in mid-year would be just really not
Quite
exciting. It would not be exciting.
Political economy of the European Union with Professor Jacques in English. Global political economy with Professor Haidt. Islamic world with Professor Borde. International relations of East Asia with Professor Lee. Financial statement analysis, accounting with Professor Weiss. Geopolitics, religion, security, and Eurasia with Professor Prodromou. Foreign relations and national security law with Professor Glennon. Comparative politics, Professor Bulutgil. North Korean state and society with Professor Lee again. Political economy of the European Union with Professor Jacques in French. Modern terrorism and counterterrorism with Professor Forrest. Any particular?
Well, I'm in the comparative politics class. That's interesting. It's quite an academic-y class. It's just, theoretical. And today we're talking about how democracies turn into authoritarian regimes. So it's kind of relevant. So that could be interesting. It's a 2-hour class. So you'd be, if you told her in advance that you were a student, she wouldn't have a problem with you coming and leaving. You wouldn't have to stay for the full 2 hours. And I think Professor Glennon also teaches at the same time, and he's definitely somebody that would be good to see. He's like a big name around here, and he's pretty cool. And I took the political economy of your class, Professor Jacques. He's also quite a big name around here, and that's one of his lighter classes. He teaches like corporate finance and investment law or investment portfolios or whatever. But that's a cool class to take as well.
As you heard, Professor Lee is teaching 2 classes today. He's basically taking care of the half of the East Asia curriculum that we have here at Fletcher, so it might be good to get to know him and get a feel for the field and for his style of teaching, because he'll spend a lot of time with him if you do want to do the East Asia field of study.
If you're here through the kind of later evening hours, I'll also put in a plug for the 5:30 discussion that's happening, talking about whether the system, whether the U.S. political system has strong enough checks and balances in place to make it through the Trump administration, and that there's some pretty feisty debaters, Professor Khan, Professor Chase, and moderated by Dean Chakravorty and Professor Babbitt. So if you're looking for kind of an academic experience, but where you're not falling in mid-semester to econometrics, and you're here, I think that'll be a pretty fun evening. So I'll ask a question. So you guys haven't really talked about like the really fun stuff. Like what's fun about Fletcher? What do you do that you love that just,
There's lots of parties. There's the culture nights, which happen, I don't know, there's like 5. So there's like Asia, Africa, Latina, Americana is on Saturday, and Midnight. And I've gone to all of them, and they're really good fun. And then there's a big after party after. But there's social events a lot of the time. But there's Fletcher Feast, which is really good. Which is that's about once a month as well, maybe. People sign up to host like 5 or 6 people in their house, and then you sign up to be part of it. And there's about 100 people take part in it, with like 15 hosts, and it's just 5 random people, or like more. Like sometimes there's 10 people who don't necessarily know each other. And the 3 I've gone to, there's been 3 of them that haven't known anybody, and I made new friends through it. So it's like a dinner party. It's really good fun. And then there's the clubs. Like some of the clubs are pretty, like the Forum or maybe Security is pretty intense, but some of them are fun. I'm in the Ambassadors, which is like a singing group, and we just sing at the culture nights or the like we just practice once a week for an hour. That's really good fun. And then a lot of the culture clubs, like I'm also in the Japan club, and we have sushi parties, or sometimes we just like send a message like who wants to go get ramen or speak Japanese. So a lot of things.
Yeah, this is more talking about just the fun orgs that exist out there. For example, food policy. We do some more academic stuff, but then we did a tour of Taza Chocolate Factory last semester, which offers a lot of free chocolate samples. It was incredible. Fletcher Feast, obviously. There's the running club on campus. There's the Wild Outdoors Club. Some of these you'll get to go if you go to, I think it's at 320, is the student org open house. You'll get to hear some of the fun things. Also, Kian, in addition to the culture nights, there's winter and spring recital. And honestly, they're really incredible to get to see your classmates that have, like, he has a really nice voice. To like get to hear people playing piano or violin or some of our professors. It's just so cool to see people outside of the academic sphere and how talented they are and like this huge spectrum of possibilities. So plenty of parties, but plenty of cool things that are not about getting wild or whatever, but getting to experience what people are really good at and passionate about.
Yeah, and we also have open mic nights where people assemble at someone's house and they volunteer and sign up to perform maybe like a short piece or like a monologue or like a song or like a musical instrument. And we also have the Fletcher Improv Group, which is run by this amazing gentleman who is very actively involved in sort of improv activities. And they perform at the cultural nights as well. So great, fun group. Sports also, I think. We have the Fletcher Football Club. Are you a part of it? The Fletcher. Yeah. And yeah, lots of sports activities. Rugby. Yeah, we have rugby.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yes.
The social hours.
Social hours, yeah. Every Thursday we have social hours which are sponsored by some student club or some office in the school, and we have good food from all over the world. And yeah, we have our journals. We have the Fletcher Forum, of which I'm an editor. We have the Praxis, which is some human security journal. And there's just so much. And the social list is always rife with things that are happening. You will learn more about the social list when you step into the Fletcher bubble. So I will leave it for that.
I think though the greatest week at Fletcher is Disorientation Week, which is taking place between the last day of finals and the commencement weekend, where students organize all sorts of fun events, going to movies or going bowling or going to a shooting range. I think last year a bunch of students did that. What is it called? Bubble soccer on the Fletcher field. We did that. Softball, all kinds of cool things, because you basically have a week to spend, and if you're still around, because you wait for commencement. It's a week to spend with friends and fun activities.
I'm going to ask one more then, just to wrap it up. Can you just talk about what the best class you had in Fletcher, the most influential class perhaps that you've had, and why?
That's a tough question. I think taking international relations theory in practice in my first semester here was really influential, because not only did I get to build on my undergraduate stuff, and so it made the transition into grad school a bit easier, but it also landed me a research assistant job, and that landed me a teaching assistant job for that same class in the second year, so last fall. I got to know my faculty advisor fairly well, who's also my thesis advisor now, and yeah, it was a great opportunity to get somebody to know in depth really, and to work with them very closely, and to sort of explore my interests, but also their interests, and collaborate academically and intellectually in some ways.
One class, I don't know if I would call it my favorite, but something that I'm so thankful that I took was, and you might have heard a bit about it yesterday, there's the Design Monitoring and Evaluations course, and Aisha and I were in that. So you come 2 weeks before orientation, and you have class every day, you have a lot of reading and a lot of work, and I don't think I've ever been on one sense, so stressed about academics ever, and especially having taken a break of 4 years between undergrad and now. But it was also one of the most rewarding things. It got me totally back into the academic groove. I got to be in class 2 weeks prior to anyone else coming, so I got to meet 40 amazing people right off the bat. And then orientation week, even though it was still crazy because you were working on your project while orientation was going on, I just felt so much more at ease and confident about, oh, it's just a bit, sorry. More confident about everything coming on, while other people were just like, where do I go in the Fletcher building? So it was actually a really rewarding experience, even though it was so nutty.
Yeah, I would just echo what Molly said. I took that class as well, and if you want to work in international development, that is definitely a class you should take. Another class that I took, which I don't know if it's going to be offered now, is Development Aid in Practice with Professor Rob Wilkinson. Great class. It sort of combines everything there is about development aid and how it actually operates and what are the underpinnings of development aid, like what are the politics behind it and what are the economics behind it and the business aspect of it and the political human rights aspect of it. So if you want to work in development, that's a great class. Hopefully, if you can take that.
One class that I've completed that I really liked was international trade law, that a couple of us were in. And I don't know if you were as enthusiastic about it, but I really liked it because it was a good it's kind of, a lot of the law classes I think are really interesting because law is kind of just like a codified version of international relations theory. It's how these countries actually wrote down about international relations. So I've enjoyed a lot of the law classes because I'd never taken a law class before. But my favorite class is probably one that I'm actually taking now, and I've only had a few sessions of it, but it's Raphael mentioned Klaus Chariot, and he teaches a class on transatlantic relations, and it's an amazing class because we're like sitting around this table, and he'll ask real policy questions, and it's like we're in a meeting with him discussing like last week we were discussing, okay, imagine we're NATO and we need to discuss whether it's 1994, do we want to expand eastward, or do we want to stay as we are, do we want to shut down the whole thing altogether? And he was actually there during these discussions in the 90s as part of the German government, so he can be like, well, actually what I told the Secretary General, and so that was amazing. And that's a really exciting class because you really feel like you're learning how to actually make policy with somebody who is as experienced as anybody else in the world.
One of my favorite classes was from last semester with Professor Ibrahim. It was called Leadership, Teams, and Organizations. And it was a really unusual class for me. I've never taken a class that was structured in that way. Every week we had to read a case study from Harvard Kennedy School about a different leadership challenge related to working in a team or leading an organization, or just about organizations in general, what kind of structural challenges there could be. And then the actual class session was a discussion. And as was mentioned before, the different opinions and perspectives of the students in the class made it really interesting because there were people who were lawyers or had experience in the military or from humanitarian aid, NGOs or something, who it just made the discussions very interesting. And it was also great because part of the class is we had to think about where we want to be in 5 years and 10 years and prioritize what do you want out of life, and in addition to what do you want from this degree. So it was I want to take that class again. Maybe I can audit it or something. I thought it was so great, and it was great to take that while jumping into the Fletcher experience because it made you consider things in a really interesting way.
I want to take that class too. I actually read the course reviews, and they were really extraordinary. People saying that's the best class they've taken in their whole academic career. So put it on your list. Leadership with Professor Alnor Ibrahim. Yep. So great. I want to thank you guys, Molly, Raphael, Aisha, Kian, and Priya. Thank you so much for your candor and lending your expertise.